Hello, my name is Zayandra, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be having a little informal discussion about Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, and specifically we're going to be focusing on the physical copy of Shantae and the Pirate's Curse for the Nintendo Switch. Now I'm on the eShop page just to demonstrate that the game is available for a mere $20 for download. Anybody can go to the eShop and download it and spend $20 to do so. So this game is very much widely accessible via the Nintendo eShop. What's not accessible is unfortunately the physical copy of the game. The physical copy of the game is uh, currently worth between $300 and $500 depending on who's selling it on what day. And I'll provide a link in the video description for a chart of the historical change in value in price of the game. And on the topic of price, I just want to specify that as a collector, I do see a difference in some sense between price and value. Just because a game has a high price doesn't necessarily mean that it has high value. And of course, we live in a day and age where there are tons of bubbles in the video game market and in many markets. And so just because something has a high price doesn't necessarily mean it has a high value. And sometimes the value of something is a little bit more abstract than just a monetary figure. I think specifically in the context of video games, we're in a day and age where formal efforts to preserve video games are just not being made to the extent that they need to be being made, and that leaves collectors with the burden of essentially preserving the medium for the moment. And so I see collectors as having a value in the sense that they are currently the people preserving video games and the art form of an industry essentially. Um, and the price as a result of some of these games kind of increases depending on their scarcity. And so Shantae and the Pirate's Curse for the Nintendo Switch is a current generation video game. The physical release, of course, also current generation, but it has seen such a market increase in value. So I'm going to go ahead and pair this with some gameplay of Shantae and the Pirate's Curse. I'm not super good at Shantae. I don't really play the game that much. I just own a copy of it because I became very curious about it when I saw the value increase, and I wanted to be able to tell this story. So let's begin. We're going to start by contextualizing what the Shantae series is. The Shantae series is currently 5 games strong. I'm thinking it's also going to have more games because it's honestly at its height of fandom. More people are playing and knowing about Shantae now than they have at any point in the series history. So, Shantae is a platformer slash Metroidvania. So it's a 2D platformer with some combat elements to it. You are essentially Shantae. She is a half genie hero, and she has a ponytail that does damage. It's pretty sick. Um, so the original Shantae game was released for the 2000 or for the Game Boy Color in 2002. And the game was limited in its production because in 2002 the Game Boy Advance was already out. So as far as Game Boy Color games release goes, from a marketing perspective, it wasn't really expected that a consumer was going to go to the store and pick up a Game Boy Color game as often as they were going to go pick up a Game Boy Advance game. So because of its existence late in the or because of its emergence late in the Game Boy Color's life, it had a very very limited release. But it also benefited from all of the um, public or all the development tools that were available at the time of its release. Like all of the entire Game Boy Color lifespan had happened at that point, which meant that all of the knowledge that was gained for how to leverage the power in the Game Boy Color was available to the developers, and they used it very well. The first Shantae game, is notorious for having really good animations, really strong gameplay, and also a very good soundtrack that took very good advantage of what the Game Boy Color was capable of doing at the time. But given that it only sold a rumored 25,000 copies at most, not a whole lot of people got the opportunity to play the game. The people that did raved about it and really, really spoke highly of it. But because of the limited scope, it took 8 years for the developers at WayForward to justify producing a second game. And so that second game, Shantae Risky's Revenge, was released in 2010, but it was released on the DSi eShop, and the DSi eShop and the 3DS eShop are two different marketplaces, which means that when the 3DS came out, Nintendo did to the DSi eShop what they've become famous for doing with last generation eShops, which is just they killed it. So the lifespan of the DSi eShop was not super long, kind of coincidentally, honestly, limiting, in my opinion, the release of the second Shantae game. So now you've got 2 games in a row in this series that are coming to platforms in such a way that limits, in my opinion, the scope of their release. So to be a fan of the Shantae series, you either had to be an avid Game Boy Color collector, or somehow you just, happened upon it or knew about the game from just the legends of the Game Boy Color game to play it on DSi, if you even had one of those, because, the DSi wasn't enough of an update for a lot of people to switch from their DS Lite since they played the same games. So the only thing you were gaining with the DSi by buying it was access to this digital marketplace, which at the time in 2010 was not enough. The marketplace for digital downloading games on console has changed quite a lot since then, but Nintendo had only really started doing it with the Wii, and the DSi was kind of their second foray into it. And again, the shop was killed after a lifespan of less than 5 years. So the third game in the Shantae series, in my opinion, is kind of like a soft relaunch for the series in some ways, because it got a physical release in 2014 for the Nintendo 3DS, but the number of people who had played the first 2 games were, again, still relatively limited due to the limited scope of those releases for those systems, the DSi and the Game Boy Color. So a lot of people who play Shantae now probably played Shantae and the Pirate's Curse for the 3DS first, because that at the time was the most widely released game. And this began to set a trend, this began to really show a trend of the games getting more popular as they released, because they continue to be very high quality games. And so in 2016, the developers at WayForward put Shantae Half Genie Hero, or they made a 4th game for the series, Shantae Half Genie Hero, and put it on the Wii U. So this was actually the first time Shantae was not on a handheld system. It was actually on a full-fledged console. But that full-fledged console, unfortunately, was the Wii U. And so the scope of this Shantae release, once again, was actually kind of limited. So it's kind of interesting to look at the first 4 Shantae games and think about how the first game was a Game Boy Color game with a relatively limited release scope. The second game was a DSi download game with, again, a relatively limited release scope. And the third game didn't suffer from that because it was released for the 3DS, but the 4th game, just by coincidence of being on the failed Wii U, ended up being limited as well. So, this brings us to 2018, 2 years after the release of the fourth game for the Shantae series. 2018 was kind of a big year for Shantae, in my opinion, because Xseed did a classic developer thing for the time, which was port their game from the Wii U, Shantae 4, from the Wii U, over to the Nintendo Switch, which at that point had already outsold the Wii U by a fair amount. So at the time, a lot of developers were taking titles that had been Wii U games and putting them onto the now successful Nintendo Switch as a way of salvaging some profitability for these games. But Xseed did a physical publication for Shantae Half Genie Hero for the Nintendo Switch, making it the first Shantae game to get a physical release on the Nintendo Switch. Now, later that year, WayForward in December partnered with Limited Run Games to offer a physical run of Shantae and the Pirate's Curse for the Nintendo Switch. They were now bringing the 3rd game in the series to the Nintendo Switch as well. And so this is kind of a key point in the story, and it's really important because the awareness of the series was still relatively low. Shantae has at all points in the last decade honestly been growing in popularity, but still at this point, only the 4th game was on this new platform, the Nintendo Switch, and I think that it was somewhat experimental or speculative on WayForward's part to simply do a limited physical release for the 3rd game to see if there was an attitude for republishing the original games. And the 3rd game made the most sense because it was, for most people, the entry point to the series, given its wide release on the 3DS, more so than, again, one of the rarest Game Boy Color games, or a DSi download title, which was, again, a limited time frame release. So I think from a developer perspective, it just made the most sense to do the 3rd game because it was probably set to make the biggest splash in the marketplace. And so they put the third game up for a 4-week pre-order in December of 2018, and now Shantae 3 and Shantae 4 were both available in a physical format for the Nintendo Switch. And that momentum kept building. So in 2019, about midway through the year, Limited Run takes about 4 months to ship their copies. They start shipping Shantae and the Pirate's Curse physical editions, and Way Forward actually announces the release of the 5th Shantae game. And so now there's going to be a 5th game in the series, and it's going to be released for the Nintendo Switch. I'm doing awful at the game, by the way. It's going to be announced, so it was announced to come out for the Nintendo Switch later that year in September. So in September of 2019, they also partnered with Limited Run to do a limited physical release for the 5th game, but they also ended up giving it the Best Buy treatment. So some Limited Run games get some wider production and just get on store shelves in Best Buy. And so at this point in time now, in 2019, in September 2019 specifically, when the 5th Shantae game released, it was now possible to get the last 3 games in the series. And it had enough momentum to demonstrate to Way Forward that there was actually an appetite now for these games, that fans wanted to play these games. And given that the first game, the game that started it all, was kind of at this point legendary, again, for being one of the most rare Game Boy Color games on the collector market. They realized that, not a lot of people had a really good opportunity to play the first game. So at this point in time, going into 2020, it seemed that Way Forward committed to bringing the the first 2 Shantae games to the Switch, and technically the last 2 Shantae games to be released on the Switch. It's a little bit oxymoronic. But essentially, in 2020, Limited Run announced that they were going to be working with Way Forward to bring physical copies of Shantae 1 and 2 to the Nintendo Switch. And these 2 games were also going to get the Best Buy treatment, which meant that in addition to getting a limited release on Limited Run, which only meant that they had a special cover variant available to Limited Run purchasers, what just happened here? Sorry, I'm getting a little confused by the game. The 5th game in the series was now available, essentially alongside, the first and second game were available pretty widely now. There was like a long window. And so again, this was at a point in time in 2020 when Shantae's popularity was at its peak. Now there was a lot of awareness for how good the series was, and now there was an awareness that all 5 games were going to be available for the Nintendo Switch in a physical format, which for collectors by itself is a really awesome thing. And then when you pair that with the fact that Shantae itself is a legendary series, that is also a really, really like good combination of circumstances for collectors to come to value something. And so starting in 2019, when Shantae 5 was released, the value of the physical copy of Pirate's Curse did start to increase. It went over $100 by the end of 2019. And you can see that in the graph that I provide a link to. And by late 2020, when Limited Run was in full swing with doing pre-orders for the second game and making it clear to the public that it was going to be possible to own all 5 of the Shantae games physical for the Nintendo Switch, the value for the third game was going crazy. It was exceeding $300, and by the time Limited Run started shipping those copies in April, May of 2021, Shantae and the Pirate's Curse physical edition for the Nintendo Switch hit its peak value of around $500 for a brand new copy. For, again, a game that was only $300 at pre-order less than 3 years prior to that. So just a very, very fast increase in value, obviously. And it has since tapered off just a little bit because I think there was a little bit of a frenzy at that moment. But even at that moment, as Limited Run was shipping their pre-orders for the first and second Shantae game, they had yet to do the Best Buy release. So that meant that even after the physical editions from Limited Run hit the market, there was still an opportunity for consumers to go to Best Buy in summer of 2021 to go get Shantae 1 and 2. So even to this day, also the fourth game in the series is available from Xseed's website directly, and because of how widely available the fifth game was, it's not that expensive to get on aftermarkets, despite the fact that it is in fact out of print. Um, and so this leaves kind of a weird situation now where Shantae 1, Shantae 2, Shantae 4, and Shantae 5 all saw release in the physical format in such a fashion that they're widely available, and it's fairly easy and inexpensive to get your hands on them. But if you want to have all 5 games, that third game is insanely scarce by comparison because it was released at a time where it was unclear that all 5 games were going to be available. The awareness of the series had not reached the peak that it now has, and basically the only people out to buy this game were people who honestly probably already had it for the 3DS, and I think people were still not super favorable to the notion that they were rebuying properties for the Nintendo Switch. I think that early in the Switch's life cycle, a lot of people were complaining about that. I don't hear a lot of complaints about that so much these days. I as a collector am a very big fan of what the Switch library is offering. I don't think that every game needs a physical offering, but that's neither here nor there, I suppose. I'm adding a little bit more of my opinion than I was expecting to here. So, um, where are we in this story then? Where does that leave us? At this point in time, WayForward has said that they will not do a republication of Shantae and the Pirate's Curse physical because they believe that the digital marketplace availability is enough for players. And I think that that kind of is a key distinction, that like a player, somebody who's genuinely interested in this game and wants to play it, is going to be perfectly fine downloading the game on the Nintendo Switch eShop and just paying $20 to do so. Um, as far as collectors go, that's an entirely different thing, and I don't think that they see that as a market that they need to cater to for the sake of their own profitability. And it just doesn't make sense for them, therefore, to try to appease people in that sense. Now, they're also in some ways protecting the value of the third game by refusing to reprint it, which is also good for the people who have it. But that kind of begs the question of who has this game and who made money off of the value increase, or who could feasibly make money off the value increase. And honestly, the story that I've told here kind of leads me to conclude that only really fans of the game are going to see any kind of profitability off of the increase of the game going from $30 at pre-order to $500 at peak to $300-ish now. And that is because to have paid the $30 price to pre-order, honestly, at that point, you were pretty much a genuine fan. Probably nobody had the foresight to know that Limited Run was going to put so many of these games onto the Switch. And so what that means is that uh, the the true fans of the game who just bought the game because they wanted it are the ones who kind of benefited the most. But if you're a collector these days, paying $300 to $500 to purchase a copy of this game to complete your collection, you're certainly not going to make money. Like if you bought it at the peak at $500, you've actually lost money. And so it's not like, looking at this game at this high price, it's not an opportunity anymore to make money. The opportunities, therefore, then to make money off of this kind of thing come from essentially being a supporter of good content and knowing in your or knowing or valuing what you think is good about games, and then supporting those developers. And so to that end, there are a lot of limited run publishers now working with indie developers to do this sort of thing, and that concept has become a lot more prominent since 2018, which is very interesting. But like with the original Shantae game for the Game Boy Color, the people who bought that game did not know anything about how it was going to increase in value. And the people who benefited the most from its increase in value, in my opinion, were the people who bought it and played it back in the day. And the only reason there were more games in the series was because people bought it and played it. So, um, these stories of increase in price for games are just interesting because they kind of demonstrate that if you do value game collecting, in my opinion, the best opportunity to make money lies in current generation purchasing, essentially, and just focusing on stuff that is being released now. And if you value sealed stuff, don't open the game and hold on to it. And that supports the developers, because when you're buying games in the day and age that they're released, that money goes to developers. Whereas purchasing things on collector aftermarkets only funds collectors, who have, to some degree, in my opinion, merits for getting funding, because collectors, again, are the people who are responsible for preserving video games in a lot of ways right now. And I think that larger efforts need to be made to enhance how we preserve what is essentially an art form. It's an under-recognized art form. That's what video games are. So anyway, that's where I'm going to end today's video. Sorry I didn't get all the way to fighting this boss. I'm really not good at Shantae, and I was focusing more on what I was saying about the physical edition. I appreciate you if you made it all the way through this. If you agree with what I said, consider leaving a comment. If you disagree, certainly leave a comment. Let me know. I would love to hear from y'all. And if there's any games that you're curious about, if you've seen a random value increase in any game and you want to know more about why that is, I would potentially take a look at it.